All right, and we are back with part two of my Dragon Slayers design commentary. Uh, First part got cut off as my baby woke up, and so she's now back asleep, and hopefully that means here in our second nap we will be able to do part two and finish up this design commentary. There's not too much more to go over, so hopefully this part will be quick. Um, so we got dragons to talk about. We got DM advice to talk about. We have converting between the things and just some general wrap up and thoughts. So dragons, like I was saying in the first part, they're a part that I'm very excited about. It makes sense. It's a game called Dragon Slayers. That there's going to be some dragons for you to slay. Um, these you should basically, like most dragons in most games, consider them to be the bosses, right? These are the big bads at the end of your campaign. There are four dragons provided in the book, but there's certainly room and opportunity for folks to come up with their own versions of dragons as well. Um, the things to note about dragons, I wanted them to be dangerous. And one of the things that is tricky about games where you have like one big scary enemy and then a bunch of other PCs fighting it is the action economy, right? The action economy is the idea that if all the PCs get a turn and there's four of them and only one bad guy, then the PCs just have more actions. They're going to win just simply by virtue of that. And so you need to balance that out, right? And there's lots of ways that games have done this. And so the ways that I did it with dragons is that they do have a turn. They take their usual turn based on their speed, but then they also take another turn each time a hero takes a turn. So if there's four heroes, the dragon's going to have 5 turns, right? They have their individual turn and then 4 turns for the four heroes. So they're going to act a lot, and that means they're going to be super dangerous. I anticipate when dragon slayers try to fight dragons that they will die. That was certainly the intent behind it. Is that this is not supposed to be something that will go down quickly. I think it could, it can go either way. I think if you're high enough level, or you have enough advances and some magic items, you can probably take down a dragon quick enough. And if you don't, you're dead. I think that's more or less how the game plays. Um, there's a couple of other fun things about dragons. They have a roost, which is their lair, right? And that provides some sort of like passive ongoing rules for any fights that take place in that dragon fight. Also helps the GM conceptualize how they should map out the dragon fight. And then also there are these boons, which are things that the PCs can grab when they kill the dragon. And these are so killing a dragon is going to help you because you are going to get a cool thing. Um, this is absolutely me just being in love with Elden Ring and going into the dragon communion churches and eating dragon hearts and gaining dragon powers. I want that, right? And so that's what this is. Now, what are these boons inspired by? They're inspired by the draconic actions, which are these like very powerful actions that dragons can take once per round. All right, so what about our dragons? Which four did I land on? Well, I landed rather than on like chromatic dragons, I landed on, I guess you would call them elemental dragons. Um, Frost, fire, void, and plague. And each of them is sort of dangerous in their own regard. Frost dragons, they are all about sort of cutting off zones. So if you remember in part one, when we were talking about zones and paths, frost dragons are tricky because they are going to isolate the heroes from one another. They're going to just sort of create these avalanches and ice walls and stuff like that that are going to make it very hard for the PCs to work together. They're going to try and separate them from one another. And as you can see, the frost dragon is largely about debuffing. right? So cutting off paths, giving you disadvantage, slowing people down, debuff, 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 so that eventually when it decides to attack you, it will destroy you. A thing to note about these boons, and you'll see this as we talk about all the dragon boons, is that two of them are based off of the draconic actions above. So you kind of get your own version of it. So like the PCs can do this as well. If they kill a frost dragon, you can take this ability of creating an avalanche from the dragon so that in a future fight you can be the one to cut off enemies from one another. And that can be very effective. There's a question in chat. Is this a standalone game? Yes, it is. It's everything you need is in the book. Dragon Slayers is totally self-contained. All the rules, everything for the players and the GM, all that in one book. The other thing about dragons is that you eat parts of them, scales and hearts and stuff like that, and those are going to just give you sort of passive things. So yeah, that's the frost dragon. It's got a bunch of health. It's gonna mess you up with ice breath and stuff like that. I love it. Void Dragon is the first dragon that I actually play tested, and it was in the playtest campaign that I ran with a lot of my friends that was very influential on the design of this game. You might remember from the part one when I mentioned that Josh Hiddey is the reason that the rogue has been nerfed so much. It's because of that campaign, and that campaign is also the campaign where they fought a void dragon. Hey Matt, so good to see you. Thank you for the congrats. The void dragon is not a moving target. The whole point of the void dragon is that they sit in the middle of the fight. They have zones around them, and because they're just so massive, so gravitational, they're like a black hole that they control the fight from their singular spot. And the big thing about the Void Dragon is that they summon portals, and they don't target individual PCs. This was sort of a thing that I wanted to do, was rather than the dragon saying, I'm going to bite this person, it's going to just be more like, I'm going to affect this zone, and anybody in that zone is who I'm going to affect. This is a thing that I've often struggled with when I'm playing games and I have potentially very powerful enemies that I'm running, and those enemies, like, and I have to choose who they target. And I know as the GM, like, which player character would be the most vulnerable to attack, like which one would die the most easily or whatever. But I'm not trying to use that information as the GM, right? I'm trying to use the information of like, oh well, who would the monster attack, right? So sometimes it's hard to make that decision of, this is a single target attack from this really powerful enemy. Who do I focus it on? And so I kind of hand waved that with the Void Dragon and just said, they just attack whoever is in an area. They don't even think about you as individuals. They just attack zones. And that kind of made me feel a little bit better running that fight. Um, so yeah, the Void Dragon is going to be very gravitational, summoning with portals, as you can see. So you can summon a worm. This is a big part of the Void Dragon, is they summon these portals that either pull people close to them where they can sort of leech their life away, or summon worms to the fight. And worms are these little black hole vomiting draconic beasts that just help you in the fight. And so it's it's a fun fight. It's a very fun fight to fight the Void Dragon. I think it's very different than maybe a lot of other dragon fights. But yeah, Destiny is very inspirational for me for all of my sort of stuff. So just trying to find ways to translate a lot of that video game experience that the action and of video game experiences to the tabletop. The Plague Dragon is much more mobile, but also just a real pain in the ass to fight. So while the Frost Dragon was cutting off paths and making it harder, the Plague Dragon actually makes paths. So they are hard to like nail down. This is, I think, another thing that happens a lot in fights against big bads and stuff like that, is this idea of, um, you know, mobility becomes either a non aspect of it, or just really gets diluted down, where it's just, all right, well, we've all moved next to each other and we're going to just smack each other until one of us is dead. And so I wanted to try and solve that with one of these dragons by I solved it with a couple different ways, right? So the void dragon stays still, but you can't be next to them. They're gonna like drain you away. And the plague dragon is solving it by moving around. So if you all surround it, it's gonna be like, great, I'm out of here. I'm gonna summon a swamp in the ground over there and peer over there. And so it's gonna really kind of cause you to ping pong around the map. Um, the next dragon that we talk about, the fire dragon, solves movement in a totally different way. But yeah, I really like the plague dragon's mobility aspect to it. Um, and then also being able to sort of lock down the movement of the people that are chasing it. It's a fun dragon to play as, because you can just zip around and end up making this really weird spiderweb map, that, when you play that alongside some other enemies and stuff like that, it ends up being a very cool fight. Also, the plague dragon can turn your allies into its puppets. If a hero dies when they're close to a plague dragon, they come back and the plague dragon controls them for the rest of the fight, which is really, really dangerous, right? Like, PCs are strong in this game. PCs are strong in most of my games. So the fact that the plague dragon can be like, I killed your barbarian and now they're mine, is very scary. The last dragon is the fire dragon, which I think is the scariest dragon, of the four. I think this is easily the most dangerous one to fight. Um, the thing about fire dragons is that they, unlike all the other dragons, they don't move. Like, they don't have the ability to move as a move action during their turn, but they can move, and when they do, it's devastating. Um, they are going to take a big map and then make it uncomfortably small the longer you fight this thing. So the fire dragon is going to be destroying zones, as you can kind of see here. That's their whole thing, is that the fight is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller as you fight this thing. So how does that work? Can't move for free each turn. Like almost every other enemy has this actions 1 plus move. The fire dragon doesn't have that. Instead, it can move as an action, which is this take flight thing. They move to any zone and destroy it. They just annihilate it. That zone is no longer part of the fight. It's just covered in fire, molten rock, magma, all of that. Just absolutely obliterated sort of zone. And it's just super, super dangerous as a result. And when it does this, heroes have to move to another connected zone. And if they can't, if they can't move to another zone, they take 10 harm, which, if you remember from part 1, where I went over the health of our characters, a lot of them don't have 10 health. Of course, that's level 1 intro versions of them. Later, they're not fighting dragons, but if they eventually fight dragons, 10 harm is like a lot of harm. As we reach the dungeon master, or the dragon master section, there's a question in chat, which is, I see simple 4+ system. You're not familiar with it? Yeah, I'm happy to quickly explain it. So basically what that just means is anytime dice are rolled in this game, doesn't matter what size the die is, so D4, D6, D8, etc., or the number of dice, anytime you get a 4 or above, that's a hit or a success. You accomplish the thing that you were trying to accomplish. All right, Dragon Master. So you're running this game. Congratulations. You're going to have a lot of fun. I talk a lot about balance here. I talked about balance in Slayers as well as something that I just don't think exists, or it's something that we shouldn't worry about in games. And I mean that in like each direction of balance, because a lot of people will talk about balance in sort of two ways. One is, PCs versus enemies, right? Is it a fair fight? And then PCs compared to each other, is that a balanced experience? And I want to talk about why both of those things don't matter, and or you don't need to worry about them. First of all, I don't think we should worry about fair fights, because nobody would ever fight fair, right? Nobody in their right mind would ever engage in a fight that is a perfectly balanced fight. You would always engage in a fight in which you know you're going to win. And that would exist in an adventuring world as well, a fantasy adventuring world. So fights should just be whatever the fight is, and the PCs and the monsters and all of that should quickly engage or quickly decide I should fight this person or I shouldn't. That's a big reason why I don't do balance, is that it's just an unrealistic thing. The other thing is also it's very difficult to design around balance, and it's really hard to do with Dragon Slayers, because Dragon Slayers, every class is just so different from one another that it's very hard to say what even a typical party would look like, because every party is going to look so different, and as a result they're going to have a very different toolkit in front of them. And so like there's no challenge rating that I could provide for you that would account for a party of two players that are a ranger and a rogue versus a party of three players that are two clerics and a barbarian, right? Like those are just so different. Um, there's no way that I can be like, and this is how you balance the fights with those things in mind. The other thing I do want to address about balance is this idea of player, like character to character balance, meaning are we all equally effective? And I think, generally speaking, that's not something that we should worry about. Specifically, like, are we equally effective at fighting monsters and stuff like that? Um, because that's just not going to be the case. In Slayers, the tactician is awful at fighting. Awful. Absolutely terrible. They can only do one harm. That's it. They're not good at it. But they have an extremely potent role in their ability to swap out dice. In this game, for example, the barbarian can be like a big damage dealer. Like that's a big damage dealing class, and rogue is a really damage dealing class. And cleric, not really, right? Cleric is not a damage dealer, but they don't need to be, right? A big part of why I design the asymmetrical classes is not only do I want them to feel like what the class should feel like, but on top of that, I want to provide classes that are different levels of complexity to players. I've talked about this a lot with Slayers, but I think it's worth reiterating, which is this idea of, if you sit down with a group of players, potential players, and you're not all on board with the same buy-in of like level of crunch with a game, then you're gonna have a hard time picking a game, right? You have to either pick a really crunchy game that satisfies some people, but then some people are really unhappy, or something simple that satisfies some people and then other people get bored. That's why Root is such a good board game. Well, it's a complex game. Some of those factions are much more complicated than others. And same thing here, right? If you want to play a more complicated class, then you're going to choose something like a wizard or maybe a rogue because you're tracking more things. But if you want to kind of just sit back, you do something like you choose the cleric who literally doesn't roll dice in this game. You're just handing out little dice as treats. And that allows players with different levels of crunch desire or cognitive load, sort of capacities to play the same game together. And that's just really important to me, which is why ultimately I don't think we need to worry about balance. So that's my balance discussion. Asymmetry, I already talked about this a whole bunch, so I'm not going to necessarily go over it again, but I do think it's really important. And just as a reminder or as a history lesson on why the asymmetry exists in this line of Slayers games, I was actually working on two different games at the same time, and neither of them were making progress. And I thought, is there a way that I can smash these two things together? And that's how the asymmetry classes thing came about with Slayers, and it continues its tradition here. The thing I do want to sort of continue to emphasize here is that, I think this is something that we see in a lot of games, and I think it's important to emphasize, which is Do you need to know the rules of all the classes? No. In fact, the dungeon master shouldn't know any of them. They shouldn't have to worry about any of that. That's the player's responsibility. I do really genuinely believe the player should be responsible for knowing how to play their class, and that the DM is going to be busy enough doing all the other things. All right, when to roll, which means we are getting into the space where I talk about social checks and I talk about perception rolls and stuff like that, perception checks. So in general, you're going to roll plenty of dice in combat, and so don't roll the dice as often outside of combat. I think a common mistake a lot of folks make in role playing games is that they roll dice a lot when you don't need to. I think that's especially the case when your game has a massive skill list to it, and people think, well, there's all these skills. I want to like engage with these buttons and levers that are on my character sheet. So when do I get to start rolling these dice? Which is why Slayers has only 6 skills, right? There's not a lot of them for you to feel like you need to be engaging with them. It's also why knowledge domains have virtually no rolling. You just know things, because I just kind of want you to go. I just want you to like play and collaborate and improvise, and then that's good enough. So I try and just emphasize to GMs that I think, you know, keep the dice on the table as much as you need them to be, because you trust me, the players are going to pick up the dice when you start throwing monsters their way. Don't worry, everyone's going to be able to throw their shiny math rocks around. Um, Outside of it, just pick it up when the situation really calls for it and has weight to it. And which leads me to perception checks. I really don't like perception checks. I really, really don't like perception checks. Um, I think they're so boring, and they're oftentimes just played poorly, right? Like you go into a room and everybody just says, I roll a perception check. Is there something around here? And you're like, all right, well, okay, roll. And then that will just arbitrarily decide whether or not you notice something. You can either go in the direction like a very OSR mentality, which is you have to describe what you're looking at. And if you do that, then I will tell you information based off of what you're describing. Or you go the exact opposite, which is I'm going to tell you everything that's here, and it's up to you to decide what to do with that information. And I think both of those approaches are great, and perception checks live in the middle of those two and are awful. I don't like them, and so they're not in the game. There's no way to do a perception check. I think you should just reward players with inquisitive players who ask about specific things should be rewarded with information, and you go with that. I do admit, I acknowledge that some players really do like their perception checks or are used to running it. And if this is a game that you're playing coming from a more trad game that has perception checks, then I give you the out. Here it is. Roll read, but maybe don't. Maybe don't. Making monsters is a pretty easy thing to do. As you saw, most monsters only have like 2 or 3 abilities, and that's it. They might have a passive and a reactive, or reaction, and then that's it. A thing that I do want to sort of emphasize here about Dragon Slayers and these sorts of games in general, there's 2 things. One is health, and the other thing is buttons. I don't like giving monsters lots of health. In general, I think the highest health monster in this game is the Fire Dragon. It has 40 health, which is genuinely a lot compared to most. If you look at across my full catalog of games, 40 health is a lot. Most things have like 2, 3, 4, 5 health, something like that. So to have something have 40 health is quite a bit. But that's so. But obviously, that's very small compared to. I think I don't know. It's been a long time since I played D&D, but a fire dragon in D&D has hundreds of health, right? So in general, I'm not an advocate for giving monsters lots and lots of health. I think there are ways to make a fight interesting without doing HP bloat, either through just providing more monsters on the battlefield to distract the players from getting to the big bad, and or doing things like this, right? Your necromancer doesn't have a lot of health, but there's some arcane wards in the room, and if you don't scatter or shatter them, then you just can't hurt the necromancer. There you go. Boom. All of a sudden, the necromancer can have 10 health. It's not a lot of health, but you can't get to that 10 health until you've earned it. This is something that's manifested in a few of my games recently, especially my like diceless, healthless games like Thorn, where all enemies die in one hit unless you. But some of them have these cool defenses you have to overcome. I didn't go diceless, obvious or healthless, obviously with Dragon Slayers here, but I did want to sort of encourage the GM to work with some of these, these tricks, these tools. The other thing that I think is really important with monsters, and this just helps DMs in general, is to not give them too many things to do. Give them 2 or 3 buttons to push, and then let that be enough. I think Chris Bizet was writing about this in their dungeon game called A Dungeon Game. And Chris tries to make every monster really good at one thing. They don't have, it's a very OSR type game, but it's the whole premise is these monsters, they've got a handful of things, or these monsters in a dungeon game, they've got like one thing that they do, but they're really good at that one thing. And sometimes that one thing like breaks the rules of the game. And I think that's really cool. I think the idea of just giving monsters just a very small number of things that they're really good at emphasizes the theme of what they're all about, and also helps the DM when it comes time to deciding what they're going to do on the monster's turn. I did put something in here about converting material between other fantasy modules and Dragon Slayers. It's an imperfect math, obviously, to move things from one thing to another. This is one of those things that I can't really provide super detailed notes on, just because there's so many different fantasy systems, and it's hard to say what you should transfer and what you shouldn't transfer. I think monsters and magic items are generally the easiest things that you can move between the two, because monsters in D&D, for example, kind of look a lot like monsters in Dragon Slayers. They don't have individual dice attached to the individual actions, so you have to do that, and obviously they tend to have much more health. But generally speaking, you can move most D&D monsters over to Dragon Slayers without too much of a hassle. Same thing with magic items, as long as we're, again, not talking about magic items that are weapons and armor, because our Dragon Slayer PCs are not picking any of that stuff up. That's inherently not part of the game. But you can grab all those other cool items, magic items from your favorite fantasy game, and port them on over, and they'll probably work. You'll have to do some things like, for example, if a magic item has a 30-foot radius or something, well, okay, we don't measure in feet here, but 30 feet might be near range, one zone away, or something like that. You'll have to make a lot of judgment calls as a GM, but I think you can do it. One thing that I've been doing a lot with my games, when possible, is writing conversion guides between the games. So I did this with Rune and Reap, since Reap was sort of a spiritual successor of Rune. And so, Dragon Slayers is obviously a successor to Slayers. And so I thought, okay, I should probably write up some rules on how you can move things between the two of them. So moving from one to the other is easier. There are things that you have to consider. Since Dragon Slayers came after Slayers, it's inherently a more updated or refined version of this system, right? There's, Slayers was first released 4 years ago, and then it got its like 1.5 update a little bit after that, which brought it to the current rule set, which is what Dragon Slayers is built off of. But that was still years ago. And so there are plenty of things that are in Dragon Slayers that aren't in Slayers. The hero die, the wealth die, even the concept of using items. In fact, it's even called out in Slayers. We don't go shopping in this game, right? Like it's not an inherent part to Slayers, but it is in Dragon Slayers, because it just feels so much more part of the sort of assumed experience of a fantasy RPG is that you're gonna go get healing potions and magic scrolls and stuff like that. And in Slayers, that wasn't really the point. The point was to just go fight monsters in the city. Um, so when you move a Slayer into Dragon Slayers, they're gonna it's like an upgrade, really. You're gonna get access to a bunch of stuff that you didn't have before. You can get access to items now. You have a hero die, which like the hero die, I'm just even thinking about like a Slayer's bringing a Slayer over to Dragon Slayers. If you have the hero die, like suddenly it's almost as if the Gunslinger has an extra bullet, right? Because they normally only get 6. And the hero die for the blade, I mean, like that's how you just suddenly get way more exploding dice. That can explode. It's one more die for the tactician. It's quite potent, to give them. So this just takes Slayers and makes them even more dangerous when you move them over from this. They also gain a knowledge domain, right? They didn't have that before. They're just getting a lot of stuff when you move from Slayers to Dragon Slayers. And that's sort of what I would encourage you to do, is to just obviously give them the things. The thing about going in the other direction is harder. Going from Dragon Slayers to Slayers is a taking away of things, right? And you kind of have to decide as a DM, like which do you want to do? Do you want to slice away a bunch of this stuff, right? Like let's take your rogue and throw them into the city. So now they are in the setting of Slayers. Um, they lose their wealth die, they lose their knowledge domain, they lose their hero die. They don't have any of their items anymore, and that could be a direction to go if you just want to kind of like port them over to that more I wouldn't say streamlined, but just simpler experience. Or the other direction is to do a Slayer's upgrade, which is to upgrade your Slayer's core game to have these Dragon Slayers components. In fact, that's something that it's on my list of things to work on. Is a Slayer supplement that says, "Hey, do you like Slayers? Do you like Dragon Slayers? Do you want to like add Dragon Slayers things to your Slayers game? Here's how you might do that." Because I do genuinely think that moving a Dragon Slayer into Slayers is a downgrade for you. That's rough. And so I think you might even be better suited in um, in kind of upgrading your Slayer's core game so that your Dragon Slayers can port over more easily. But I like providing the ability to move between the things. But that's the game. Now we have our character sheets, and that's going to take us all the way to the end of the game. So that's Dragon Slayers. That's part 2 of our design commentary on the game. I'm very proud of this game. I think it's really cool. I think Mike did a spectacular job on the art and layout of it. I can't wait to hear what people think, and get some people out there playing the game. I've already had some folks reaching out about their experience reading it, and they seem to really like it. I have some ideas about stuff that I want to start making for it now that it's out there. I have plans of hopefully running a game jam for it, just like I ran a game jam for Slayers. I hope to create some easy templates that you can use to sort of create a character class or something that follows the same sort of template that Mike used with the book itself. So yeah, that is going to wrap up our time here with the Dragon Slayers design commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section. If you're watching this as a video later on, you can hop onto the Gila RPG's Discord and ask them there. And I hope you have a lot of fun with this game. Go slay a dragon. Bye.